Now that we have a general understanding of the folder structure, let's take a look at how we can make our own workspace environment in a server environment. So what I've done here is mimicked a server, my drive letter G. I'm going to start by creating a new folder here called root workspace location. Now obviously you would give this a different name. For example, if you were a DOT, Department of Transportation, you may say, DOT CAD standards or whatever. So this is the main folder structure. And under here, we want to make a folder called configuration. Then we're going to go back over to our C drive where we have installed the OpenRoads Designer Connect Edition workspace, the localized workspace for training and examples. And under the configuration folder, I want to grab all three folders, the organization, which comes from the MicroStation-based platform, the civil, which is the customized organizational structure, and then workspaces. We do not need the two configuration files. So we're going to copy those three folder structures and we're going to paste those into our configuration folder on our server. With those folders now in place on our server, the next thing we want to do is we want to edit back on our local C drive the workspace setup configuration file that is loaded by OpenRoads Designer Connect Edition on startup. And so let's go ahead and edit that file. We want to edit this line 18 that is initially commented out, and what I did was I made a copy of it, put it down here on the next line, and I modified it to point to the location of the organization-civil folder structure on my server. So here is the organization-civil location, which is what we're using then to point to the root location of our relocated workspace environment. The next thing we need to do is to define where we want our workspaces. And so this was defining our organizational level portion of our workspace. And we kind of use the word workspace in a couple of different meanings. It is a level, and it also is the total environment. And so the workspace level of our workspace environment will be taken advantage of or reset here. And you can see that we have suggested to make the changes here. So if I take this information and we're going to modify this path as follows. And what I'm doing here is under the configuration folder, I'm pointing to where the workspaces are going to reside. And so if I take a look at that, you will see under the configuration folder, I have a workspaces folder. And so we are pointing to that path with this particular variable. Now, what I'm not going to do in this demo, but just to point out, if you want your work sets, which is another level down under workspace, so you have organization, then you have workspace, then you have work set. And if you don't want the work sets on the server, let's say that you want them on a different location. In other words, these are specific to jobs where you would store your, job data. You may want to point that to a different location, but by default, the work set location right now is going to end up pointing underneath our workspaces, and we will create a workspace for this in just a minute. But just to show you, you'll have a work set then underneath our workspaces location. And so that's what that final variable in this particular file is you may want to consider setting. So let's go ahead and save those changes. And we're going to come back to our server now. We are done with our local drive letter. That is completed. The only thing we needed to do, again, is to copy these three folders and edit that file. That's the only thing we needed to do on the hard drive, or from the hard drive, if you will. So now back on our server, we're going to go to our organization-civil main trunk folder structure. And this is where you would want to make a choice. Am I running an imperial or a metric environment? For this demonstration, I'm going to do an imperial environment. So I'm going to right-click copy, and then I'm going to right-click paste. And then I'm going to rename this copied folder. to something like Agency XYZ Corporate Standards. These are the organizational level standards folder structure that would be applied to all jobs within your corporation or within your company. And so right now it's an exact duplicate of in our case, the Imperial workspace provided by OpenRoads Designer Connect Edition. So all of the levels, the element templates, the feature definitions are all going to be in here right now. And we'll talk about moving those out and migrating your own particular standards later. This is all about just getting the environment working. Once you have this folder structure copied, then we need to also make a copy of the configuration file and paste it in here. And then we want to rename it the same name as the folder. So we have now the configuration file and the folder structure. The next thing we want to do is go into this configuration file and make a couple of modifications. In this configuration file, because we are choosing Imperial, all we need to do is modify line 12 where it sets the units and change those from metric to Imperial. You don't need to worry about modifying the if statements. This is just an else or a catch-all, and so just change that and it will take care of everything that you need. And this particular configuration file holds the settings for your default seed files, for your level libraries, also for all of your reference configuration variables, your OpenRoads Designer configuration variables. Everything is in here related to the environment for OpenRoads Designer Connect Edition. Now at this point you may be wondering, do I still need to keep these configuration files and these folder structures? The answer to that is yes, you do need to keep them. There are certain things at a higher level that we are calling, for example, seed preferences is one example that we're calling from the Imperial folder structure under prefs and in preference seeds, that it loads these individual seed files as a starting point to control how Explorer looks, how our function keys are set up. So you can go in here and replace these. You can redirect these if you want to dig into the configuration more deeply. You certainly can. But for simplicity, to get things up and running, I just chose to leave them. It just makes things a lot easier. So now that we have our main folder structure duplicated and we have our configuration file set, the last step in the process to plug all of this together is to move back into the configuration folder structure, and let's go under workspaces. Now under the workspaces, we're going to create a new workspace with a name here that might be specific to a particular discipline, let's say roadway design. Well again, I'm going to just take this seed folder structure of Imperial, and there's not anything in here other than empty folders that basically set up the structure. There's no individual settings files. So I'm going to copy the Imperial standards and I'm going to make a duplicate of that. So let's paste that in here and then let's go ahead and rename that. So what I did is I carried through the Agency XYZ name. You can do anything you want to with these names, but I gave it a discipline here, and you don't have to do that. If everybody works in one discipline in a company, that's fine. You can have different workspaces in here. Let's say that you have, a DOT-roadway and a DOT-environmental, or it doesn't really matter. You can have as many different workspace folder structures in here as you want to. Where you want to utilize the workspace folder structure is to add to the organizational standards that we set in this particular folder range. And so remember, these are the organizational standards that apply to all disciplines, and then under the workspaces are the particular standards to a localized design group. And so we're going to use this example as we're setting up for our roadway designers. And so we also need a matching configuration file. So I'm going to copy the Imperial and paste it here and rename. And the name of the configuration file does need to be the same name as the particular folder structure. And then I'm going to clean house on things that I really don't care about. Let's say, for example, I want to get rid of the metric standards. And so I can delete that file and that folder structure just to clean up a little bit. But I would suggest leaving in the workspace folder structure the training and examples, because anytime a user wants to go to the Bentley Learn server and do training, they're going to need to have access to that environment. And so I would recommend leaving that there. So now that we have our folder structure, and again, there's nothing in here other than blank folders, then we need to modify this configuration file to locate that information. So let's go ahead and modify this file. And in this file, we have to tell it what is the organizational name that we want to call. Well, remember, in our situation, we had an organizational name here called Agency XYZ Corporate Standards. And so if we take that name and put that into the configuration, so we'll go in and edit this line, save it. It will then know to call that particular organizational level set of standards when that workspace is loaded. When the user enters OpenRoads Designer Connect Edition, they will not have access to pick the organizational level. Their first pick will be to select a workspace. And so this will call that particular organizational set of standards and load those into memory and then proceed to load what is in the workspace. And so that's kind of how this works. If I go back to the configuration workspaces folder structure level, if I want to add to a set of standards, let's say that in the organizational level, I have, for example, a roadway template library that is set for multiple disciplines. But in roadway, I'm going to take out some of those roadway templates. Well, I can come into my standards level template folder and put in a scaled down version of that template library. And so when the user picks the roadway workspace, then they will only see the template library that is available to them under the workspace standards location. And so that's how this works, is it allows us then to either append or override standards that are provided at the organizational level. The last area that we want to talk about is the work set level. And we do not have to create any folders here. I'm going to show you how those folders are generated. And so let's go ahead and start up OpenRoads Designer with this new environment now in place to show you what the user experience will be. The first time the user comes in, they're going to come to a welcome screen with news and announcements. They can also review example videos, look at learning content. But if we go over here to the Start Work Session icon, remember I told you that they're not going to be able to pick the organizational level. They will pick the workspace level. And sure enough, there is the new workspace level, Agency XYZ Roadway, that we created. And that corresponds to the Workspaces folder under configuration called Agency XYZ Roadway. And so you see that that matches. And so when we select that, it's going to see there are no work sets currently available. And so what the user does is they select, I want to create a work set. And in this work set, maybe I give it a job number. So we'll give it a name, let's say job 123. And you can, at this point, change where you want to store your design files and have that established with the work set. But I would suggest modifying the work set variable location I showed you earlier in the video. So we'll select OK here then to create this new work set. Once that work set is created, before we enter into the product, I want to show you how that folder structure looks. And so in our configuration workspaces folder structure, if we go into that workspace, and now if we expand work sets, we'll have a new folder structure and files associated with it. And under here you will have your DGN, your out, and you can even have specific standards at your work set level just for that particular job. Whereas the workspace level is more for a discipline, the work set level is more for a particular specific job location. And so that's how everything is fitting together and how it works for the user. So once they have their workspace selected and their work set created or selected. They then proceed to create a new file. And in this file, you will see that it's automatically pointing to the proper workspace location and the appropriate seed file that we have redirected to. And so if I make a new file here, call that test2D and allow that to open up, we will now be in the location that we have directed our work sets to be opened. And like I said, if you want to put your work sets in a location other than your server location of where your workspace environment is stored, which I would highly recommend as a review, in your workspace setup configuration, you want to go back and change the work set location to the appropriate location you want to store the work sets or the job related specific files and standards.
If you found this video helpful, please give it a like. If you want to see more such series, consider subscribing to our channel. Thank you, and see you next time.